Hello and welcome to the Savage Dream. Had a few technical difficulties, but I think I think we're good to go. Okay, so replicators are a staple piece of technology in the Star Trek universe. They can create everything from chocolate sundaes to snazzy new boots. But can they create gold pressed latinum? Let's talk about it. So, before we can really answer that question, let's get into what replicators are and exactly how they work. So, replicators take pure energy and they convert it into matter, kind of like how transporters work. So, they really depend on a huge database full of molecular patterns. So, as long as the pattern's there and as long as the components that they need to create the thing are available inside of the ship's buffers, then it could make it. So, things get recycled from the ship in order to create things through the replicator. So old clothes can be made into new clothes, old parts can be made into new parts, that sort of thing. Even human waste gets recycled and turned back into the food that the replicators make. Um, Replicators can make almost anything, but there are some limits. So here's some of the things it can make that's pretty amazing. Can make medicine, food and drinks, clothes, souvenirs, gifts for baby showers, all kinds of things. It can also make machine parts and even full on spaceships. So it totally depends on kind of the type of replicator and the size of replicator. But there are some limitations. And for example, replicators can make replacement organs, but only if they're kind of simple. So when Worf needed a brand new spine, boom, the medical replicators can make that. But when Neelix needed brand new lungs, those were too complicated, and the medical replicators could not handle that, and they couldn't make a new pair of lungs. There are some other things that replicators also cannot do. They cannot create dilithium, which is why when Voyager was stranded in the Delta Quadrant, they spent the entire first season scouring the quadrant for dilithium. They had to actually go and physically mine it from somewhere in order to use it as fuel. Replicators also cannot make antimatter. They also can't make fresh fruits and vegetables. They cannot make animals or plants. They can't make people. They can't make stuff like that. So it kind of begs the question, how exactly does it make food, since food is made out of fruits and vegetables and plants and animals? But I don't know. I guess if it's small components, it's fine. But if it's something more complicated or a full on living being, then that's a little too complicated or too difficult for the replicators. In addition, replicators cannot make things that are extremely rare in the galaxy. Rare like latinum. Latinum is actually way too rare for the replicators to make. Now, you might be wondering what exactly is latinum, because I didn't totally know until I made this video. I was like, I know it's used for currency and the Ferengi love it, and supposedly some other people use it too, because as we know, the Federation works on pinky promises. So I looked into like what exactly is it and how is it made and all of that. So here's the deal. Latinum is found only in liquid form. So in order to make it currency, something that's tangible that can be passed around, it's suspended in gold. So gold makes it solid. And that's why it's called gold pressed latinum. And then that gold pressed latinum can be found in slips, in bars, in bricks, and in strips. That's what it is. So really, we mostly hear about it with the Ferengi. They use it as a medium of exchange. They use it as currency. Within the Federation, they don't really use any currency. So I guess everybody just works for love. So that's what it is, and that's how it's found. And that's why, because latinum is so rare, that's why it's hard to find. That's what makes it valuable as currency. And that's also why replicators cannot make it. Now, the replicators might be able to make gold. I don't know how common gold is in 24th century Alpha Quadrant. If it's common enough, yes, replicators can make that all day long, but it's not really going to serve you in the Federation since nobody uses currency. And if you remember that episode from Star Trek The Next Generation, season 1, episode 26, I want to say, it's called Neutral Zone. Terrible episode. If you haven't seen it recently, give it a skip. But in that episode, there are a bunch of people from like our time, or I guess from the time, like 1980s or whatever, the time that the show came out. And one of the people was like super rich, and when he wakes up in the future, he's like, "Let me call my bank. Where's my money?" And he's all upset that like his bank hasn't existed for 300 years and he's no longer rich. but also you don't need to be rich because you get everything that you need inside the Federation. Like, there's nothing else you need. Everything you need, education, food, medication, it's all available. So really, you don't really need currency. Anyways, so there you have it. There's my little spiel about replicators and how they work, how they don't work, and whether or not they can create gold pressed latinum. The answer was no. And why latinum is so rare and why it's so valuable and why it's even called gold pressed latinum. So if you have any questions about replicators or comments that I did not say, be sure to drop it in the comments. Also, if you're watching me live, let me know where you're tuning in from in the comments. And if you're watching the replay, put hashtag replay so I know that you were here. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. I just want to talk about replicators and how cool they are and what they can and cannot do. We have PS2 Cypher tuning in from North Carolina. Hello, welcome back. I wonder what the weather's like there, because let me tell you, it's like 100 degrees here in LA. And in order to do this recording, I have to shut everything, like all the windows, turn off all the fans, turn off the AC and everything else so that it can be really good audio quality. But I'm like so shiny and sticky. You can just see how the light makes me glow. Hello. Okay, we have Carol in Toronto. Thank you for saying Carol, because I'm trying to read your screen name and all I got is garden. So thanks for letting me know that, Carol, and welcome from Toronto. I actually visited Canada for the first time a year ago, or a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And I was there for Canada Day, which is just like 4th of July, but for Canada, I didn't know that. I had never heard of it before. It was so cool. Like, best time ever in order to visit. Okay, so I really wanted to get on here and talk about replicators and kind of how they work and how they don't work. And I found it so incredibly interesting to dig into. I have a podcast that I did with one of my best friends all about Star Trek called the TNG podcast, right? So we went episode by episode for all 178 episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation. And in each episode, we go like scene by scene. So I feel like that took us about 2.5 years to do. And now I feel like kind of an expert in that one show, because we just like went in so deep and we went in so hard on that show. And these are things that I did not think about when I was just watching. Like, I've been watching this show since it came out, watching it since I was a kid, watching it for over 30 years. And there's so many things I never thought about, like, how do the transporters work? How do the replicators work? What exactly is gold pressed latinum? Why doesn't the Federation have currency? Mostly I think about kind of the plot hole situations where I'm like, why did that happen? That was crazy. But there's a lot of other kind of smaller things going on in the Star Trek universe that are super interesting, that always make me think, like, not only are they really kind of interesting thought experiments, but also there's so much technology and so much of the culture that has been birthed out of this idea that Gene Roddenberry had in the 60s, which I just find completely amazing. Like, not many franchises have that longevity. So anyways, now I'm just ranting about my love of Star Trek. So if you're viewing, if you're watching, I'd love to know how you got into Star Trek or how old you were when you first started watching. We had a friend on our show as a guest who had just started watching during the pandemic, because he was like, I'm nothing else to do. And so he's like, oh, let me pick this up. And then he just got totally obsessed and got totally into it and watched all the shows and watched them over and over and over. And I can't imagine coming to this show as an adult, right? It's kind of exciting. And we've got a whole new reboot. We've got all these new shows. So it's not hard. Like, there's a lot of entry points now. All those reboots just happened in the last couple of years, though. So between 30 years ago and like 5 years ago, there was no new shows. But now there's so many new shows. There's like entry points for everyone. But just imagine getting into this show as an adult. PS2 Cypher says, I heard all of the inconsistencies in TNG, DS9, and Voyager are due to swapping the writer's room every couple of seasons. Yeah, I mean, there were inconsistencies, I think, in storylines, or maybe not inconsistencies. That's probably not fair word to say. They were, because the show is episodic, right? And not serial, because there's not a story that's being told all the way through. It's kind of jumping all around. It's okay if you change up writers, and it's okay if you change up themes, because at the end of every episode, it just hits reset and everything starts all the way over from the beginning, you know? So that's kind of okay to have different writers and different directors and different styles from episode to episode. It's not going to take anything away. However, I think I think maybe that's a strength, because if you watch Star Trek Discovery, like, you can really see how taking away writers or adding writers makes the whole story different. because that was more long form storytelling. So if you didn't have a vision for where the story was going to go, it just keeps taking these hard left turns and you're like, what? Wait, what? Wait, what? And then at the end, you're like, none of this makes any sense. Or if it's a show like Star Trek Picard, where they like barely reference, I don't want to talk badly about the show. Who are we kidding? Sometimes I do. I love these shows, but they're not perfect. So in Star Trek Picard, I was so excited when it came. Drop it in the chat if you've seen Star Trek Picard. I was so excited when Star Trek Picard came out. I could not wait to see it. And I actually liked season 1 personally myself. I felt like there were so many Easter eggs. And I was like, oh, I know who that is. Oh, I remember Picard Day. You know, like that was really fun. But then I got to season 2 and I was like, okay, let's see where we're going. And then we just went downhill very quickly. And I kept asking episode after episode, has anyone seen, has any of the writers actually seen like TNG? Have they seen Star Trek The Next Generation? Because this isn't like the math isn't mathing on this. You know what I mean? Yeah. So Picard season 2 made my head hurt. Yeah. And then season 3, I felt like was an apology for season 2. Maybe I'm making this up, but it felt like since season 2 was so like, we just made a whole bunch of stuff up. We didn't know the fans would be so into it, like, and so critical of all of that. I would call this whole long story to say that I would call inconsistencies, right? That was not very tight and buttoned up. But I feel like season 3 was like, sorry about that. We're just going to bring back all your favorite characters and have them do like this big kumbaya moment and have them get back in the ship and do like a space battle. And then we're going to have them play poker. And, you know, I hope that makes you feel good. I'm not going to lie. It did. It did. And being a super fan, even if it sucked, I was going to watch it. Like I was going to watch the whole thing, but it's probably not over and over. And you're right. PS2 Cypher says that DS9 did transition into a serialized show, which it absolutely did. Which is also interesting, like to take something that is that is episodic and then turn it into a serialized show is a really interesting choice. I don't know how many shows have the like freedom to do that because I feel like a serialized show usually needs a lot of forethought, like especially with the pilot, because the pilot to me, like a really great show is when the pilot and the season or the series finale kind of loop together where it's like it ties up all the loose ends. And I feel like that takes a lot of forethought. Like I recently watched a couple years ago, I got together with all my nerd friends and we were doing weekly watch parties and we watched Battlestar Galactica together. It took us like 2 years to finish the entire show because we watched one episode a week. But I had never seen the show before. And I was like, it's like from episode to episode, with the exception of like 2 episodes that weren't good, every episode was so clearly thought out. Like this connects to the big story we're telling. And I just appreciate you. Like you can tell as a viewer, you can just tell that the thought that goes into it. And I think it makes for a better experience and really a better story. Okay, so PS2 Cypher says the showrunner for season 2 of Picard, I'm guessing you're saying it, and 3 was the producer on Voyager. Yeah, that's interesting. I think like I recall that some of the writers were the same or the directors or something, producers. I don't really know the difference between writer, director, and producer when it comes to a TV show anyways, but some of the creative leads on Picard were also around for some of the other shows, but it just didn't feel like they had watched the show before. Just like the timelines, the characters, their interactions. I was just like, why is this character doing this thing? And all of season 1 of Picard, I kept waiting, hoping, waiting for for the old crew to show up. It didn't even need to be everybody, just one of them, like a glimpse of Beverly, a glimpse of Geordi, something. And it just never happened. And I was so sad. And then I was like, but season 2, that's where they're going to show up. Nope, wrong. And I was just like, I quit. And then they came out with season 3 where they were like, all right, we'll bring him back. And then I was like, okay, I'll watch it. Okay, Carol says, I've seen Picard. I've seen all the episodes of all the shows. Really? There's a lot of episodes with a lot of shows. I watched them all as they originally aired. Okay, so Carol, did you also watch all of Prodigy and Lower Decks? And like, have you seen like all the shows? I know TOS had like the animated series. Have you seen all the shows, or do you mean like all the live action, all the shows that were not animated? I'm just curious. PS2 Cypher says he was dealt a bad hand for season 2, and season 3 was the apology. It definitely felt like an apology. I'm not mad at that. Yeah, I'm not mad at it. I know some people were like, but I was like, I get to see the whole crew together. That makes me happy. I will say, I'm not going to say the spoiler in case you haven't seen Picard season 3 yet, but uh, we had this whole thing about will they, won't they with Captain Picard and Beverly all throughout Star Trek TNG. Okay, that's 7 seasons, 7 years of will they, won't they. Episodes where they make out, but only because Captain Picard is like taken over by some energy being or he's been replaced by an alien duplicate or whatever. So we never actually see them hook up. We even see in the episode Attached, which I hate that episode. We even see in the episode Attached where she's like, Jean-Luc, I didn't know you felt that way for me all this time. And he's like, I just never could tell you because I didn't want to be disloyal to, Jack Crusher, who passed away like, 20 years ago or whatever. We still never see them hook up. Then in season 4, we still don't really see them hook up, or season 3 of Picard, we still don't really see them hook up, but there is like movement in their relationship. And honestly, I didn't care. And I'm a super fan, but I was like, I don't care. 35 years later, I don't care what's going on between the two of you. Kind of, you had your chance to get me interested. I will say the exact same thing for Counselor Troy and Riker. But forget the movies. By the time we got to season 7 of Star Trek TNG, where Counselor Troy was kind of hooking up with Worf. By the way, let me know what you thought about that in the comments, because I feel like that's such a controversial coupling. But anyways, once they started hooking up and Worf was all like, I don't know, I don't want to make Riker hate me because we're kind of besties. Plus also he's my boss. I was like, okay, whatever. I just didn't even care anymore about the Troy and Riker thing. I was just so over it at that point that I was like, good for you, Troy. Find somebody else, because goodness knows Riker's found a million other people in the last 7 years. Some of them could have worked out. None of them did, because again, it's an episodic show. So God forbid these characters find lasting happiness. At the end of the episode, their love has to somehow be banished or leave the ship or get their mind erased or something so that we can reset and go back to the beginning, which is kind of like, that's kind of the downside. And I think for Voyager specifically, it struggles the most in my opinion. And I haven't seen all the shows like Carol has, but in my opinion, I think Voyager suffered the most with its love stories for that reason, because you needed a reset at the end of each episode. The who had a crush on who just kept shifting and changing like musical chairs. And it was really weird. It just was really weird. And Harry Kim like never found anybody, which just always makes me sad, like literally to this day. Okay. PS2 Cypher says Captain Sisko is my favorite captain. He is a lot of people's favorite captain. Carol says, I watch the live action shows. I'm not so much into the animated ones, although I've seen a few and I did enjoy them. I will say Lower Decks was awesome. Like, I haven't finished it. I haven't finished whatever season it's on now, 4. But season 1, I was like, this is a love letter to me personally. That's how I felt watching it. So it's definitely worth watching the first one. The second one, it gets a little repetitive. I still think it's funny. And then the third season, I was kind of like, meh, which is why I haven't finished the 4th season. But I'm sure they're all amazing. I'm sure I'm missing out. It's on my list of things to watch. PS2 Cypher says, how do you feel about Nog's story arc? I think his character progression is stellar. And also asks, do you think Harry Kim is still an ensign to this day? So to your second question, yes. I do think Harry Kim is still an ensign to this day. Like, we don't, how they would do like these crossover events. Okay, so we had an episode of where we see the characters who've like progressed in Starfleet. So they had that episode of Voyager, which I forget the name. If you remember the name, put it in the chat. But there's that episode of Voyager where where Harry and Chakotay were in this little shuttle and they were trying to take the ship through like some slipstream, and something went wrong. And so the shuttle got through, but then the slipstream like broke up and then the ship crashed and then everybody unalived. And then they tried to like change time, right? So there was like, when they're in the future time, it was Geordi, who was like Captain Geordi or something like that, who came to try to stop them from going back and messing with time. Or we would see we would see Admiral Janeway. We saw Admiral Janeway in Voyager, which is just fun. So sometimes we see like these promoted people, but yeah, for Harry Kim, no, I think he's still an ensign. And here's a funny story. I used to run a club called Sci-Fi Matters inside of Clubhouse, which is like an audio only social media platform. And on this one day, we had the actor who plays Harry Kim, Garrett Wong, come in just to see what Clubhouse was about. He was just like, I don't know what this is. Like, I want to check it out. So he came in and we hosted a room and we had just like hundreds and hundreds of people in there and everybody got to ask a question. He was on with us for like, I think like 2.5 hours of his time that he just spent hanging out, talking about acting, talking about Star Trek. Turns out he's a big sci-fi fan. So it just like made me love him so much more. So he was just talking about being on the show and stuff like that. What Timeless? Thank you. Yes, it was called Timeless. That was the episode. Thank you. Okay, so Garrett Wong, he was talking about the ensign thing, and he says that his like gamer handle is always ensign. Like he's really, as a person, he's embraced the fact that he has never been promoted, will never be promoted. And he even said in that room, like he said jokingly, not only was he not promoted, but Tom Paris was actually demoted and then promoted before Harry Kim was ever promoted even one time, which I thought was just really funny and really messed up because like he created the astrometrics thing with 7 of 9. So he's obviously really smart, really capable, really, he gets really experienced over the 7 years that they're in the Delta Quadrant. Why can't they promote him? And then do you remember there was that episode where he was talking to his mom and he was like, Mom, they can't promote me because they only have a certain number of like top level positions on the ship. And that's why. I was like, come on. You're the only Federation ship in the whole Delta Quadrant. They could all be captains as far as I'm concerned. You know what I mean? Like, why can't they all be promoted? They're still going to do their same job. He doesn't need to be anybody's technical boss, but like, he didn't have to be an ensign. He was way more experienced than an ensign. And 7 of 9 was like automatically a higher level because of all the Starfleet captains' knowledge that had been assimilated. Okay. I'm missing so much in the chat. Oh, okay. So Nog storyline. Do I think that Nog storyline, how do I feel about it? So here's a confession. I have not seen Deep Space Nine all the way through. I have not. You know why? Because I watched TNG and then I watched Voyager and I did not watch Deep Space Nine in the middle. Like it was almost like I could only do one show at a time. Because I think at the time I was in college or something. So I could only do like one show. So I, to this day, I know. I don't like saying it out loud because I feel like everybody else who loves Star Trek is going to be like, you're not even a real fan or something like that. So I have only seen Deep Space Nine season 1 up to episode, oh gosh, I have to look, but I want to say like 14 or something. So I haven't even finished all of season 1. I got to this really kitschy episode and I was just like, because you know, 90s TV is 90s TV. And I don't have the nostalgia factor that I have with TNG being like, oh, it's old, but it's my childhood. Like I don't have that with it. So I have to like stick in. However, barring all the new Strange New Worlds, all of that, barring all of the new stuff, everyone tells me Deep Space Nine is the best one. Everyone tells me that. Like as far as the story development, the character development, the arcs, the connection with the characters, the moral of the story, all of it. Everyone tells me Deep Space Nine is the best one. So like I'm motivated to watch it, but also like I feel like there's so many shows to watch. You know, like I just finished watching Acolyte, which I'm like dying to talk about. So there's so many new shows to watch that it's hard for me to go back and watch an old show. Plus, there's 7 seasons of DS9, and I haven't even finished half of 1. So I just feel kind of like I missed the boat on it. So I cannot answer your question about how I feel about Nog's story arc. However, people commenting on my videos are always like, Nog's like the best character and his story arc's the best. And like so much love for Nog and Cisco, probably more than anyone else in all of Star Trek. Maybe Captain Picard gets, you know, after Nog and Cisco, maybe there's Captain Picard, Captain Janeway, 7 of 9. That's pretty much it. That gets a lot of love. Okay. They broke the real rules of time travel without the time police showing up. I know those time police were very finicky when they wanted to like show up and enforce their time rules. Ensign Kim lacked initiative. I know there was that video when why did Harry had some kind of virus that was giving him nightmares. Maybe it was that episode when he was like infected by something and he turned into like an alien. I think it was that one where he had the cute little dots. And they were like, I think what was that episode called? Lost Son or something like that. And they were like, you're our son, you belong to our people. Your mother must have left a long time ago to take you all the way to, or your father or whatever, to take you all the way to the Alpha Quadrant and all that stuff. And turns out that was all a lie and they just wanted to drain him of all of his genetic material. That was a great episode. Yeah, but I think he had a nightmare in that episode where they were like, you lack initiative and that's why you weren't promoted. But honestly, they were just never going to promote Harry Kim. We don't know why. We don't know why they don't like him. Oh, by the way, if you have not heard of this and you are a Voyager fan, like I am, the actor who played Harry and the actor who played Tom, they have a podcast called Delta Flyers. How cute is that, right? So they have a podcast where they just reviewed every single episode of Voyager. Now they're doing every single episode of Deep Space Nine. And when they were reviewing Voyager, they were basically just talking about all the behind the scenes experiences they had from each episode. So they actually have clips of them like watching if you get Patreon, they have clips of them watching the episodes and like talking about it or whatever. But on the podcast, they just kind of talk about, oh, you remember that scene? And you remember that time? You remember when the director did that? You remember when this crazy story happened? And it's so entertaining and so engaging. And then they bring in guests, other actors who are on the show, other co-stars, other crew members when their episodes come up. And now that they're doing Deep Space Nine, they have another host who's from Deep Space Nine that kind of like helps them out. Anyways, yeah, Delta Flyers, amazing. So back to the chat. We should do a podcast. Oh boy. I love podcasting. So like I said earlier, I'm a co-host of a podcast called the TNG Podcast, where we went through every single episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation. But I am also going to be a guest co-host on a podcast called Trek, Marry, Kill. And I think we're going to start that next month or something like that. I don't know when the episodes are going to drop, because the current host, Brian, or one of the current co-hosts, is like extremely organized. So he's got like all the episodes all planned out and dialed in. But you'll get a chance to hear all my thoughts on a range of shows, because in Trek, Marry, Kill, it's like that fun game you may have played. He jumps around to episodes from all of the Star Trek franchise and basically grades them, like what was the best scene or the best line or like the most of its time and all these different things. It's super fun. Do you know Antiderivative Jill? I do not know who that is or what that is. So please let me know. PS2 Cypher, give me some more info. And then Vincent says Uncle Les Landau, which I think you're talking about. Uncle, it's funny. Me and my co-host, we call Gene Roddenberry Uncle Gene. We're not related to him at all, but we just refer to him like that in our podcast episodes. We'll be like, oh, you know why that happened? It was because of Uncle Gene, which I just think it's fun. It's just like, don't know anything about the man personally, or don't know much, I should say, but just feel so kindred with him. The fact that he has created a world that has not only inspired so many hundreds of thousands of people, whole new generations of technology, changed the world. Amazing. Like, amazing. Something I definitely aspire to. I don't even want to say aspire to be or do, because I don't know if that was his plan. I think he was just doing something really cool, and other people also thought it was really cool. So I think that's what I aspire to do, is just do something really cool and then have other people also love it, which is amazing. Oh, okay, so this is Antiderivative Jill is another Star Trek podcaster. I do not know her, but it sounds like I need to know her. If you did a DS9 podcast, I would like, subscribe, comment. So Vincent's saying, if I did a DS9 podcast, I wonder how good that podcast would be with me being a first-time DS9 viewer. If that would be good or if that would be bad. Because one of the things that I think makes our TNG podcast good is that we're so in love with the show that when the episodes are so bad and so cringy and just so like terrible, we can tear it to pieces without losing any love for the show. We can be like, what were they thinking? For example, do you remember that episode in season 1 of Star Trek TNG where there's like this electricity monster that comes in, it starts infecting the crew members one at a time, and there are also the Antikins and the Cele whose outfits look like they came straight from Party City. There's one with like a big wolf head, and there's one with a big snake head, and they're like warring aliens. And I mean, it is the dumbest thing. Like, everything about that episode is so dumb, but like, we could talk about how dumb it is and still love the show. And I would feel like if I talked about how dumb something in DS9 was, like I might offend people, which I never felt like that with TNG. Because I'm like, if you're offended, we just have a difference of opinion, and that's fine because I love the show. You know what I mean? So I don't know. Vincent said that would make it even better, which is hilarious. Oh, skip. Yeah, definitely skip the episode with the Antikins and the Cele. I'm trying to remember the name of that episode, and I'm not remembering it, but it doesn't matter because it's not good. It's like not a good episode. But I mean, I started with season 1, so you already know it's probably not going to be a good episode. PS2 Cypher says, I hate that salamander episode. So that is an episode of season, I think it's also season 1 of Star Trek Voyager, where Tom Paris breaks the warp barrier. So apparently, the ships cannot go past threshold. Oh, Vincent, you are on it. Yes, it's called threshold. So apparently, starships are not supposed to go past warp 10. Like it's impossible for them to go past warp 10. And I think the fastest. Oh, is it season 2? Okay, I think the fastest we see a ship go is like 9.5 or 9.8 or something like that. But there was something of like, you can't go past 10. 10's like the maximum you could ever do. So Tom is like, bet, I think I can go past 10. So he takes the Delta Flyer and soups it up. Or maybe it wasn't even the Delta Flyer if it was season 2. I don't even think they had the Delta Flyer yet. But he takes some shuttle, he soups it up, he gets to go past warp 10. And then because it went past warp 10, it caused him to like alter all of his genetic material and evolve super fast and go into the future. And he becomes a lizard in the most gory and awful way. Like it is one of my least favorite Voyager episodes. And I'm a good one for being like, this is my favorite. This is my favorite. Every single episode, I'm like, oh, I love this one. That one, I'm like, I hate this one. Can we please not watch this one? And my Star Trek co-host is one of my besties. She's like, oh yeah, let's watch it. It's fun. And I'm like, it's awful. So as he's like turning into this lizard, we don't know he's turning into a lizard. He still looks like a man, but then he like his tongue falls out and just his skin's fall. It's just like, it's like a horror movie, but not scary. You know what I mean? It's just the gore. It's just gross. Like nobody needs that. And then suddenly, and we still don't know he's a lizard. So as his fingers, I think, start clumping together or something. So he kidnaps Janeway, takes her on the shuttle, takes her warp 10. Then they end up on some planet. When the ship finally tracks them down and finds Paris and Janeway, now they're lizards. And they have a whole bunch of other lizard babies crawling around. And you're just like, what just happened? Why are they lizards? Also, Tom, it took him like several days to become a lizard, but Janeway, she became a lizard after like one trip. And also, I don't know if they did some transporter foolery, which would be my guess, to turn them back from lizards into humans, but they definitely left all those lizard babies on that planet. So in theory, there's some kind of highly evolved human species on some random planet living their best life as lizards. But I guess they're not going to get that far because even though they had like 6 or 7 or 4, whatever clutch of little kids, all the incest will probably make sure that they die out pretty quickly. I don't know. It's weird. It's weird. Everything about it's weird. Okay. PS2 Cypher says warp 10 is instantaneous, where they exist everywhere all at once. That was a good movie, if you saw that one. And then Vincent says the anti-Genesis. Yeah, exactly. So Genesis was an episode of, I think it's season 7 of Star Trek TNG. One of my favorite episodes. I love that one. Like we call it the de-evolution episode, where everybody de-evolves into like whatever their nearest ancestors are. But since everything in the tree of life is connected, some people become lizards and some people become monkeys and some people become spiders and all these things. I think that episode was so interesting. That episode I just find fascinating. The other episode I find fascinating is, and Vincent, you probably know this because I don't remember off the top of my head. There's an episode of Star Trek Voyager where there's a maybe it's called macrophage, where there's a macrophage, there's a giant virus. The virus is like as big as, I don't know, a dog or something like that. And it chases people through the ship and it's like infecting them. It's crazy. But I'm a microbiologist. So my specialty is studying viruses, or my training was in studying viruses. So that episode, I just was like, oh my gosh, it's like all of my worst fears. You know what I mean? Like for something tiny, macrocosm, thank you. For something tiny and like potentially deadly to become gigantic and just as bad, that was a super interesting episode. So Genesis and macrocosm are two that's like, as a scientist, they're just so fascinating. Like they're such interesting story ideas. And I really enjoy the way that they told those stories. But yeah, I agree with you, PS2 Cypher. The lizard episode, not my fave. Not my fave. PS2 Cypher also says, I think DS9 did it better where the wormhole aliens are non-corporeal beings, whereas matter beings evolve into energy-based beings. Yeah, we also see that with, oh gosh, okay, I'm not gonna remember the name of this episode either, but we also see that with the episode where they rescue the alien named John Doe from a crash. No, not Q, but they rescue an alien. This is the TNG episode where Beverly and team rescue an alien from a crash named John Doe because he has amnesia and doesn't remember who he is or what's going on. I remember he has like a healing touch he touches O'Brien and his shoulder magically heals. And, he's kind of trying to figure out who he is. And then at the end of the episode, his people come to like find him and finish him off. And he's like, I remember now, you were chasing us and you destroyed all of us in the shuttle. And I was found by these kind people and they saved me. And the reason why you're chasing us is because we're evolving to another level and you just don't want to see us rise. And while he's talking, he steps back and then he just turns into this glowing being of light. They also talk about that on Lower Decks, but in like a really funny way. And this idea of a corporeal being becoming an energy being is super fascinating, like as that's the evolved form. It's kind of based on nothing. Like it would make more sense for a corporeal being to evolve into another corporeal being, but different, right? Like that logically makes more sense. But it's such an interesting idea. However, I did just make a video today about the episode season 2, episode 1, The Child of Star Trek The Next Generation, where Counselor Troy becomes impregnated by a ball of light. And that's where an energy being becomes a corporeal being. And I don't love that as much. I think because of how it happened, of how he just like impregnated Counselor Troy because he wanted the human experience. He wanted to know, what is it like to be born in this society? Yeah, PS2 Cypher says, I didn't like that episode. Join the club. Like, my goodness. I think that part's really traumatic. But if it was just like a beam of light that came onto the ship and then turned into a human being and then walked around and interacted with the other humans, that'd be really interesting. Now, granted, Worf would shoot it immediately, but that'd be an interesting concept, right? So just like we had John Doe going from corporeal to energy, it'd be cool to see energy going into a corporeal being, but in more of a consensual way, I guess. Yeah, so Google says that the episode is called Transfigurations. That sounds right. That's probably it. PS2 Cypher says, it was no different than the alien abduction episode where we capture them in the end. So there was an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation where Picard gets kidnapped. I think this is the one you're talking about, PS2 Cypher. Let me know if I'm wrong. And Vincent's just like on the Google button right now. So he's probably going to find that. Oh, it's called Allegiance. I remember that one. So in Allegiance, where Picard gets kidnapped and then put into this prison with other aliens, and it's an experiment of what's it called? It's an experiment of like not laws, but like ways of governance. So there's like the democratic kind of federation, and then there's like some other type of aliens where they're like all anarchists, and it's some other type of aliens where they just like agree with you and whatever. But anyways, while he was absconded, there was another version of him walking around the ship, hanging out, making out with Beverly, living his best life. And I forget how I think at the end he wanted to like send the ship into some really dangerous place or something just to see if they would listen. And that's when they're all like, wait a minute, this isn't really the captain. I mean, he had been acting fishy the whole time, but this is when they were like, okay, he doesn't care about the safety of the ship. This is not our captain. Oh yeah, he was drinking. He was singing drinking songs, Vincent. I totally forgot about that. Were they even in English, or was he singing like Klingon drinking songs? Yeah, he was just doing some real weird stuff. And when we reviewed that episode, we were like, it's funny how long it's taken people to be like, this isn't you. Like this is not your normal behavior. Now, I would never assume that he has been replaced by some alien facsimile. That would not be my first guess. My first guess would be he's been taken over by an energy being, because that happens like 10,000 times. That'd be my first guess. But even in the real world, if someone was acting weird, I'd be like, maybe head damage. You know what I mean? Like I wouldn't think they've been replaced, but I would think something's wrong. And there is a scene in that episode where Beverly is like, you're acting a hot mess and I might need to relieve you of duty. And I can do that because I'm the chief medical officer. And Picard responds with, you know what? I'm going to relieve you of duty because I'm the captain. And you're like, what? Picard would totally not do that. Relieve him right now. Relieve him right now. Anyways, that episode was super interesting. And I don't know how they did that, because it wasn't like a meat suit. Because you remember when they trapped the fake Picard and they like undid their technology, and it was 2 aliens. So it was 2 aliens that were morphed into the one Picard. So it wasn't. So I don't really know. I don't really know what was going on there. Okay. It was the one when Riker was getting his limbs removed. Oh yeah. Okay. The episode when they were all getting abducted by aliens in their sleep. The X-Files episode. Yeah. You know what? Those creatures were corporeal though, but they lived in like like a subspace dimension or something like that. Like they didn't live in the same phase, the same dimension. And they were like ripping a hole in space-time so that they could come into our dimension from their dimension. And every time they opened a hole, they would steal people from the ship and then like experiment on them and like cut off their limbs and then put them back and stuff like that, send them back to the ship. And I don't really know why they were doing that. And then they were trying to rip this hole open bigger so they could come through. And then the ship, Geordi probably figured it out or something. And Riker was on one side and they were on the other side and they like destroyed something and closed the rift and never saw them again. So I guess that worked out. But I'm so curious about why they even made that episode. My only thinking is that at the time, maybe X-Files was really big and they wanted a little bit of that market because X-Files was around the 90s as well. That's my only thinking because it was very much an alien abduction episode, right? There's no rhyme or reason. It's like, why are they doing this? We don't know. Are they good or bad? We don't know. How long is this going to happen? We don't know. Super interesting. Yeah, no, it wasn't Schisms. Schisms was the one when Riker was kidnapped by some kind of aliens and they were like messing with his mind so that he kept thinking like he was on the ship, but then he was in a prison, but then he was on a ship, but then he was in a prison. Unless that's the one you're talking about, Schisms. You're not talking about the other one. That one was really good. That one I actually really enjoy. My co-host hates that episode because she hates any episode where people question someone's sanity. She hates any episode like that because she feels like personally threatened. Like, how can you not believe people when they're saying they need your help and you don't believe them? And Riker is literally, when he was doing the play, he's literally in an insane asylum. So nobody believes him. And he's like, I'm number 2 on a starship. And they're like, yeah, I'm the captain of a starship. He's like, no, really? And they're like, yeah, okay, take some more medication. I just think the acting in it was really good. I thought that the storyline was really interesting. I like the kind of like, which is real, which is not. But I understand why my co-host felt extremely uncomfortable about that episode because you're just like, poor Riker. No one will ever believe him and he can never escape. And then even when people come to help him escape, like Beverly comes in to see him, he just thinks it's one of his many, many delusions. And he's just like, oh, I'm just hallucinating again. Oh, you're not really here. And then when Worf comes to actually physically, save him, he runs away and starts calling for the guards because he's like, none of this is, I don't know. It's just exactly, it's gaslighting. So I get that. My co-host hates gaslighting of all forms. She's just like, I'm against it. It's not entertaining. It's not fun. It is horrible. I agree with her there. It is pretty horrible, but I do like the episode Schisms. I like it much better than whatever I was talking about, that episode where they get kidnapped and cut up and stuff. I didn't like that episode. It's creepy. Not in a good way. It's creepy in a bad way. Like, why do I have to watch this? Yeah, I think probably they had a few X-Files contenders at the time because that was another really big show in the 90s. And it's a show with a bunch of aliens. So why wouldn't they do an X-Files type episode? Like it kind of makes sense, Okay. I have been rambling on and on about some of my favorite episodes, some of my absolute least favorite episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, but it all started with talking about replicators and how awesome they are. So the truth is out there. Oh, and I love X-Files too. Like, love that show. So I am doing these live streams every single week for the next year at the least. So if you want to join me next week, it'll be every week, every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, where we can just come and hang out and talk about Trek. So if that's you and you want to talk some Trek, please join me live. Join me in the replay. I will love to have you. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and close out the live stream. And I'll see you guys next time. Okay, last question. Vincent says, would we consider reviewing the TNG films? Our podcast, we ended our podcast last year. So my co-host has since retired from podcasting. So she's not going to review them, but I might someday. I don't know. I feel like before I review the TNG movies, maybe I should finish DS9. I don't know. There's so many things to do. I don't know. And PS2 Cypher says, like, subscribe, and share. Vincent says, please. Well, we can talk about that in another live stream. All right. It was so nice seeing you. Thank you for joining. For people who are joining again, people who are new, welcome. People on the replay. So great seeing you. And I will see you guys all next week. Bye.